You ready to go?
Let's do it.
Thanks for doing this, man. I appreciate you coming down.
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing me down here. I'm excited, man.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're wildly successful. You're flying me in for this. Give me a pound, man.
Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it.
You got it.
Your story is fascinating, and I think it's incomprehensible to people to understand what you went through at such a young age, at the age of 16. For people who don't know, why don't you just give me a brief background on what happened to you when you were 16?
I was arrested at the age of 16 for a murder and rape that I did not commit, and ultimately I was wrongfully convicted of that. So my wrongful conviction, which happened at the age of 17, was caused by coerced false confession, prosecutorial misconduct, fraud by the medical examiner, terrible public defender. I lost even though the DNA didn't match me. I was given a 15 to life sentence because I had been charged as an adult. And I then spent 16 years in a men's maximum security prison from age 17 to 32, losing 7 appeals, getting turned down for parole because I maintained my innocence, going through that, and then ultimately being exonerated through further DNA testing, which identified the actual perpetrator. Fast forward to today, and I'm an attorney now. I've been cleared, and I have a nonprofit organization, the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, which has freed 11 people. We've helped pass 3 laws aimed at preventing wrongful conviction. I'm an advisory board member for the group It Could Happen to You, and we passed another 6 laws. Currently, we have 17 cases, and we're working on policy changes in New York, Pennsylvania, and California.
It's fascinating. It's unbelievable what you've been through and how common that this is in the judicial system in the United States, for people getting wrongfully convicted. So what was the story of the girl who was, I think she moved from Colombia to New York?
Yeah.
And she was in a high school with you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Angela Carrera was her name. She moved from Colombia. She was living, as I understood it, she was living a very sheltered life. She was in the country for about 1.5 years. And, ultimately she was, she went missing on November 15th, 1989, and her body was found a couple of days later on November 17th, 1989, and, she had been raped and murdered.
And how old was she?
She was 15 years old.
15 years old. And you guys were friends in high school, right?
We were not. I knew her name. She knew mine. She was in a couple of classes as a freshman, one as a sophomore. That was it. I think in 2 years, I briefly spoke to her twice, so we were not even really on a hi-bye basis.
Now, did you guys interact at all? Was it just like randomly passing by? You met her a couple times, but you didn't really talk to her much. Did you?
Yeah, it was the latter. Like you said, she just by coincidence or by school schedule, she happened to be in 2 of my classes as a freshman, one as a sophomore. Like I said, I briefly spoke with her twice. One time was I passed a note to her on behalf of a male classmate who was interested in her, and he was kind of nervous to approach, so he asked me to pass it to her, and that was really it.
So the day she went missing in 1989, I believe it was, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah, November 15th, 1989.
So the day she went missing, where were you at? What was going on? What was that day like?
It was just like any other day in terms of the school day. After school, I had a friend named Jason, and he lived nearby where I lived at, and we had developed a rather innovative way of playing one-on-one in wiffle ball, and so I played wiffle ball with him that day, and had dinner at his house, and around I would say around 8 or 9 o'clock, I left his house on my bike, and I drove down the hill about like less than 10 minutes away and got to my house. And that's what I was doing that day.
And I think that day when she left her house and she went to like a popular hangout area in the woods in mid-afternoon, I believe it was.
Yeah, so let me give some backstory. So Angela was in a photography class, and the teacher had assigned the whole class, including her, to take pictures of some foliage. So after school, she went back to her house with her older sister. The teacher had assigned like a buddy system like for the protection of the students. Like a male student was matched up with a female student, and so she went back to her house. Her sister went to the bathroom. When she came back out, Angela wasn't there. She left on her own. So she went to the park to take pictures of the foliage. And the male student played hooky on the assignment, so he never showed up. So she was taking pictures on this there's a path between Hillcrest and Peekskill, New York, at Hillcrest condominiums and well, there's Hillcrest there's the Hillcrest school, and then there's condominiums, and there's like a woods and a macadam path that links the two. And so she went down onto the path, which is not that far away from this wooded area called which is called the Pit, which teenage kids used to drink at and used to make out. That wasn't very far from off of the path. She's on this path with heavy woods, taking pictures, and she comes across Stephen Cunningham, who's a drug addict and who's high, and he sees her, he attacks her, murders and rapes her.
This guy was smoking crack, I think it was, right?
That is correct.
And how old was he?
At the time of the crime, he was 29 years old. And so, and Angela was 15, and at the time I was 16. I never saw him a day in my life. It was just kind of like a random encounter. It was just unfortunate that she came across him at that time, and, that's what gave the occasion for him to attack her and, do what he did.
So he attacked her. Obviously, he murdered her.
Mm-hmm.
At what point did she get reported missing? And how long after that did they discover the body?
Yeah, I think that she got reported missing later, like early evening, late afternoon, early evening. She got reported missing, and her, it was even ran in there was a local paper called the Evening Star. It was a daily newspaper, a Gannett paper, and they ran a story, teen missing, had her picture and everything, and and then a couple of days later they ran a follow-up story. Her body had been found, naked from the waist down.
Right. Yeah, they found her body, and obviously she had been beaten. I think she had a lot of head trauma.
That's right.
They found a bludgeon wound on her head that was like an inch deep, and they said a Gatorade bottle or something.
Well, the Gatorade
her.
bottle comes in later. So
okay.
I'll get into that. I know what you're getting at, though.
Okay.
So she had like a deep head wound in the back, and so that was the medical examiner. I mean, he kind of flip flops a little bit. I mean, in one hand he says, well, the wound on the top of the head, that's what killed her, but then he also says, well, either that or strangulation.
Okay.
So he can't really determine which of those two things actually is what caused the death, but both of them occurred to her. We're going to get to the Gatorade bottle after.
Okay. And so the people investigating this, is it just the local police department?
It's just the local Peekskill Police Department, yes. And there had been very few murders in Peekskill overall. So, their inexperience, I think, was definitely a factor.
Not a common thing to happen.
Not a common thing to happen at that town, no. So in the course of the police investigation, they interview a lot of students from the high school. And some of the students wind up telling the police that they might want to speak with me, because I didn't quite fit in with them. Like the kids were like a year. They were like a year older than me my first year. So let me hold on a minute here. Let me start again, because I'm skipping things. But
take your time.
Sure. So my first year in the high school, the kids were like a year older than me. I skipped first grade, and so that caught up to me in high school. And so, the kids were a little bit older than me, and, I really wasn't into drinking and going to parties and chasing girls and playing organized sports. And plus, I didn't know them. Like I grew up right next to the high school, but I had my own set. I went to Catholic school from grades 2 through 8. And then I had a lot of friends after school. So my after school life was different than my grade school life. So I was like kind of popular after school, just whatever I would. There's a lot of kids that lived in that apartment complex, and kind of whatever I would suggest would be what we would do. We're going to ride bikes, we're going to movies, we're playing Monopoly, we're playing video games, football, all type of things. Right, but it was all basketball, all kind of unorganized things. But that was after school, and in school that was a different crowd, a different set of kids. So I was kind of quiet there too. And I wanted to go to public school for high school, not another Catholic school, because I really wanted to go to school with the kids in the neighborhood that I was playing with. And so, I purposely failed the entrance exam on the Catholic high school for where my mother wanted me to go to.
Oh, really?
So I thought, because I wanted to go to Peekskill High School, and she didn't want me to. So I failed the exam on purpose, and I go to Peekskill High School. And to my surprise, I don't find the kids that I'm playing with in the neighborhood. These are all kids that are like a year older than me, because I skipped school. I skipped a grade. So, I was definitely picked on for sure, and my grades really suffered a lot, and so much so that I had to go to summer school. But I knew that if I went to summer school in order to pass, I was going to be stuck with the same kids again next year. And so I decided not to go to summer school, and so I did not go to summer school purposely to get left back.
To get held back.
Get held back. So I get
So
held.
now you're with kids your own age.
Now I'm with kids my own age. So things did get better some that way. But then at the same time, these are still different kids. And I was not in any of the classes with the kids from the neighborhood. These were other kids, the same age as me, but other kids. So I still didn't quite fit in. I wouldn't say I was really picked on anymore, but I still didn't quite fully fit in. So I was still relatively quiet and to myself. So in the course of the police investigation, the police interviewed many students from the high school. And some of the kids told the police that they might want to speak with me because I didn't quite fit in. So this is what the police said originally put me on their radar. An additional factor is that I was a sensitive teenager. This was my real first brush with death, and I had an emotional reaction to that. And the police thought that it was suspicious that I would have an emotional reaction to the death of a classmate that, as I've described earlier, that I barely knew.
How did you originally find out about her death?
I found out originally through reading the newspaper article, the follow-up article on November 17th. And then there was also announcement in the school loudspeaker, on wake and funeral details and that thing, and everybody was talking about it. It was a huge thing. It was a huge thing in Peekskill. Yeah, I mean, the whole city kind of shut down in a way. I mean, parents were, concerned with their own safety of their children. They were bringing kids to the high school and then bringing them straight back, picking them up, bringing them straight back home. There were town hall meetings that were held periodically, updates on investigation, safety tips, that kind of thing. So everybody was talking about it. So the police thought that this emotional reaction that I had was suspicious, like it was some sort of outward sign for something that I was sorry I did.
How are you being emotional? Like, what were you doing that was making them think that you were emotional?
No, I cried. I definitely cried. I mean, many people. It affected me. I don't think I was that, in a way, I don't think I was that different than the rest of the people in the city. I mean, a lot of people were emotional. A lot of people cried. A lot of people went to multiple wake sessions. I mean, that was kind of commonplace, so much so that there was free mental health services offered to anyone in the city that wanted it. That's how badly it kind of shook everybody up. But we have these two reasons that I've just laid out why I'm on the police radar. Mm-hmm. And then there's a third thing, which is that the Peekskill police, they got a psychological profile from the NYPD. So they turned to a more experienced police department, and look, give us this profile. What type of person should we be looking for? What were their characteristics? And so I had the misfortune of matching this profile. I mean, this profile said, well, it's likely someone that knew her, someone that was a loner, likely somebody in the high school. Well, that fits me. So type of reinforcing factor. So for next 6 weeks, the police play this cat and mouse game with me, in which half the time they speak to me like I'm a suspect, and when they would push too hard and they would get me frightened and I'd want to get away from them, they would then switch it up. And Jeff is this junior detective helper theme was developed. So before I was a teenager, the career that I fantasized about having when I grew up was I wanted to be a cop. I mean, I grew up, cops were our friends. They protected us. They were definitely the good guys and people you could trust. And I wanted to have that career when I grew up. I fantasized about that. And another thing about my background is I came from a single-parent household. My father was never involved in my life in any aspect. And that also will intersect with this police tactics that I'm going to explain to you. So
you never met your father, or?
Well, I met him for the first time after I was released.
Oh, wow.
So I met him at 33. So yeah, so I never had any interaction with him. So
And the police were aware of this.
The police became aware of it, just like they became, they were aware that, I had wanted to be a cop when I grew up. That was what I thought about. When I was in my teenage years, then I switched and I wanted to be a lawyer. But still, the idea of wanting to be a cop before that was something they were aware of, and that was still kind of part of inside me some. So I was vulnerable to this Jeff as junior detective helper tactic. So they would say things like, kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. Let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time. They would ask me questions and, They asked me opinion questions and then congratulate me that my opinions were correct. They made me feel important.
What kind of opinions would they try to get from you?
They asked me, well, what route do you think that she took going from her house to the park? And so I just thought about, well, I know where her house is situated. I know where the park is. This is the most logical route that she would take.
Right.
And then, then they told me, then another thing would be, they told me her keys were missing. And then they asked me to speculate, well, what kind of keys do you think that she probably had? Mm-hmm. But separate from that, they told me there was a cassette, her cassette tape, her cassette or Walkman was found, but the Walkman tape was missing. So when they asked me, well, what kind of keychain? So I'm thinking, well, she's an immigrant, her keys are missing, probably a I Love New York type of keychain would be. So they're just asking me these opinions, and they're saying, they're using the word opinion. What do you think? And in your opinion, they're just, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm just having a normal conversation with them. My speculations or my opinions are
they're just playing psychological games with you.
They're playing psychological games with me, and in addition to that, a further game is that they're playing good cop, bad cop. Mm-hmm. One officer pretending is pretending to be my friend, and the other one is the bad cop. So they were keeping me off balance that way. And in time, I began to look at the cop who is pretending to be my friend, as an adult, a positive adult male role model in lieu of my father. Mm-hmm. So that goes on for about 6 weeks, and in the course of that, they're giving me details about, one time they brought me to the crime scene, and the lieutenant who oversaw everything, he's telling me the 3 different scenes. And at the crime scene, there's 3 different scenes at the overall crime scene where different things happen.
Like the scene where she was first attacked, and then she was dragged.
Correct. Yeah. There's a scene where she was first attacked. The area where she was raped. There's another area where her she was dragged. So he tells me this, and then he's just asking me to then confirm that. And then later on, and where I'm at the police station after that. And then the detective was pretending to be my friend. He asked me to draw a map of the area where you think everything happened at. Well, you guys just told me earlier where you think everything happened at. So I'm just regurgitating what you're saying. And when I was at the crime scene, the detective said to me, her body was found over here. And it almost, this was when he was building off what the lieutenant said. He says, well, her body was found over here, and there was leaves on top of it. It was almost like somebody was, trying. There's a contrast. On one hand, she had been attacked, murdered, and raped. But on the other hand, after that, there's an attempt to try to protect her body from the elements by putting leaves on top of it. So he tells me that at the scene, and then when we're at the police station later with this map thing, and then I'm just repeating stuff that they're saying is what I'm getting at, just as a microcosm of the many interactions that I had with the police over those 6 weeks. Mm. So they wind up taking a blood sample from me, and they said that they were going to send it for DNA testing, and that this was one way that I could be ruled out as a suspect. So I gave them a sample of my blood. Then later, they tell me that there's some new information that's come into the police file, and they want to share that with me, and that's going to allow me to be more helpful to them. First, though, I'm going to have to take and pass a polygraph. So the next day, rather than report to the high school, I instead went to the police station for this test, where I had heard through the rumor mill that other people had been tested at. And instead, they drove me to the town of Brewster, which is in Putnam County. So it's 40 minutes away by car. So there's 3 cops that come with me from Peekskill. There's the 2 detectives and a lieutenant. But the bad cop and the lieutenant, they're in one car. They put me in the car by myself with the cop who's pretending to be my friend. So another example of another psychological game that they're playing. And throughout this process, they periodically do
they have
read
you
me
like
my rights
restrained?
No, I'm not restrained at this point. Okay. No, and they're periodically reading me my rights, but I'm a 16-year-old. I don't understand what they're saying, and every time they read anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, I'm thinking to myself, my mind goes to like a civil court. I'm thinking, court, what are you talking about? We're not going to court. And that was all further obscured by the fact that they're playing this game overall, that they're pretending like, they need my help to solve the crime. Jeff is this junior detective helper. So they drove me to Brewster, 40 minutes away by car, which now means I'm not able to leave on my own. I'm totally dependent upon the police. It's a school day, so my mother and grandmother, they think that I'm in school. So they don't call around looking for me. They have no idea that anything's wrong.
They have no clue what you're doing.
They have no clue what I'm doing. No.
Did they have any idea of you like working with the police for the weeks prior?
No, they don't. My mother knew that I interacted with the police once, and then she didn't want me to interact with them anymore.
Oh, okay, so you didn't tell her.
But I didn't. So I didn't tell her. I mean, look, I'm at 16. I mean, that's the age where kids are, they push back on the authority of their parents, sure, and try to get independence, and we're all smarter than our parents anyway. And I didn't do anything. They're telling me, so what can possibly happen? They're telling me they need my help to solve the crime. The cops are our friends. I don't think you know what you're talking about. Let me just, so that was kind of like the dynamic that was going on. And, they knew that my mother didn't want me to interact with them, but I'm 16 years old, so I'm allowed to waive my rights and speak to the police without parental permission. So I get to the place, and since I'm driven there, I don't know where I'm at. I'm totally dependent upon the police now. So there's a Putnam County Sheriff. There's the polygraphist is a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, Daniel Stevens, and he's dressed like a civilian, and he never identifies himself as law enforcement. He never reads me my rights, And so we go to the waiting area, and he gives me a 4-page brochure which explains how the polygraph worked, but it had a lot of big words in it which I didn't understand. But then I figured, well, what does it matter? I'm here to help the police. Let's just get on with it. And they don't give me anything to eat the entire time I'm there. Then from there, they bring me to another small area where the polygraphist gives me countless cups of coffee. And by the way, I'm gonna need something to drink. I can't.
Oh yeah. Sorry to offer you.
Without.
Can I get you a water?
Yeah, please. That would be great.
Liquid Death.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting brand name.
They sponsor us. Perfect for this conversation.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. So he gives me countless cups of coffee. It seems fairly clear the purpose of giving me the coffee is to get me nervous. And then he attaches his polygraph machine to me. And then he launches into his third-degree tactics. So he invades my personal space. He raises his voice at me. He asks me the same questions over and over again. And as I'm not used to talking to adult males because, as I mentioned, my father was never involved in my life, and I didn't spend very much time with my uncles or other male members of my family. So I'm really not used to communicating with an adult male, much less somebody who's carrying on in the ferocious manner that he is.
Right.
So each hour that goes by, my fear is increasing in proportion to the time, and he keeps us up for 6.5 to 7 hours. Towards the end, yeah, that's a really long time.
That is a long time.
All I'm attached to this machine. And so he winds up saying at the end, I guess he was exasperated by that point, that he hadn't gotten me to confess yet. And he says, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the polygraph test result that you did. I just want you to verbally confirm this." And when he said that to me, that really shot my fear through the roof. And at that point, the officer who had been pretending to be my friend, he comes in the room. The other cop leaves. He comes in the room. Detective McTarrick comes in the room. And he says, He tells me that the other officers are going to harm me. He's been holding them off, but he can't do so any longer, that I have to help myself. Then he says to me, just tell them what they want to hear. You can go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested. So being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long term, instead being concerned with my own safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was and that nobody else knew where I was either loomed quite large in my mind. I was overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically. There's this push-pull effect. On one hand, there's the possibility of harm, and on the other, there's this false life preserver that he threw me. And so I took the out which he offered, and I made up a story based on the information that he had given me in the course of the investigation. By the time it was all said and done, I had collapsed on the floor in a fetal position, crying uncontrollably, and obviously I was arrested. Tying back to the Gatorade bottle, one of the statements that I made in the course of the false confession was I said that I hit her over the head with a Gatorade bottle. But as we're going to see a little bit later in the story, a Gatorade bottle, at that time, Gatorade bottles were made of glass. And there's no way that a Gatorade bottle would have been able to inflict the type of wounds that this medical examiner testified she had to on her head. And then in addition, there was no shattered glass. There was no shards of glass in the body either. So the story just doesn't make any sense.
Right. At what point was this the point that you finally realized that you were getting swindled by the cops?
No, this happens a little bit later, so let me tell you about that.
So you're going through all this interrogation, you're hooked up to a polygraph, and you're saying that the amount of fear that you have is insurmountable.
Yes.
What is that fear of?
I thought that it was fear of my safety. I thought that they might kill me there. I don't know where I'm at. Yeah, I don't know where I'm at. I'm in the middle of some place where I don't know where I'm at, and I have these adults that are questioning me, that are putting pressure on me.
So at this point, you obviously have lost trust in them, right?
Yes, I have. Definitely. Obviously, I've lost trust in them. Yes.
To which, up to that point, you trusted them, like they were helping you and you were helping them.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and then again, the cop was then pretending, my last hope, my last best hope, this friend, right, this detective who's pretending to be my friend, he tells me that they're going to harm me. He's telling me that they're going to harm me and that he can't stop them any longer. So that fear, is buttressed by this this outside factor is what I'm getting. It's not all just going in my head. It's external. It's external also. And the way that he's in my face when I'm being questioned, I'm in a chair, and he's this mountain of a man, and he's within a couple of feet of my face, and his voice is raised, and he's asking me the same questions. So it's all of those things in totality.
Right.
So after that, after I gave this confession, I'm on the floor, I'm crying uncontrollably. They finally get me to stop crying. Then I'm given something to eat afterwards. And then it's time to go back to the police station, and they say they're going to take me back to the police station, and we're going to share some pizza, and that's when they put me in the handcuffs, and I said, well, why are you putting me in handcuffs? You just told me that I'm not going to be arrested. So the lieutenant said, oh, this is just safety. So I didn't question it past that. So they put me in the car. I'm handcuffed behind me, and then they bring me to the police station, and the cop was pretending to be my friend and the lieutenant. They disappear, but the bad cop, Detective Levine, he's still there. But I'm interrupted as I'm eating pizza. I'm interrupted by this uniformed police officer who's periodically carrying out different aspects of processing, and so he winds up eventually putting ink on my fingers to do the fingerprints. Mm-hmm. And I remember that really pissed me off. And so I looked at this other detective, and I said, what is he doing? I've got ink all over my fingers. I'm over here trying to eat pizza, and I've got ink on my fingers now. And he says, well, he has a right to do that. And I said, well, what do you mean he has a right to do that? And I was told that I wasn't going to be arrested. And that's when he said to me, oh, you are being charged with the crime. And at that moment, I realized I'd been swindled. That, and I remember being angry. I remember also being like dumbfounded and stunned, and I couldn't, I didn't know what the hell was going to happen from that point forward. It felt like an out of control feeling. That's when I all kind of like sunk in.
Did they, during all of this, it's like they were grooming you to be their perfect suspect. Like, do you think from the onset that they were trying to just frame you? Or do you think that did they believe that you could have been the actual murderer? Or do you think that they knew from the onset that we just need to find somebody to pin this on?
I think that they just, from the outset, they just thought that they just needed to find somebody to pin this on. Let me tell you why. So, firstly, the whole false confession, there was no videotape, there was no audio tape, there was no signed confession. It's just the cop's word for it. So when they come to court,
that's crazy.
I agree. And when we came to court, they left the threat and false promise, out of their testimony. The reasons I think that it was not a good faith error is because, look, when the DNA didn't match, before I go to trial, the results of a DNA test result come in from the FBI lab. The DNA doesn't match me. And rather than acknowledge they made a mistake, they continue to prosecute full speed ahead. So in his letter to the FBI asking them to...
The prosecutor.
The lieutenant, the police lieutenant.
The lieutenant, okay.
Yeah, Lieutenant Tumalo. So he writes a letter to the FBI asking them to expedite the DNA testing because the county at that point is not able to do the DNA. They have
only the FBI does that.
Right. Yeah. At that time. Yes. So he says to them in his letter that the test results, are either going to confirm my guilt or else it's going to exonerate me. But when the results don't match me, the case kept going. He said after the fact, after I was exonerated years later, he says that he claims that, he had concerns and he went to the prosecutor, but that was all he did. Like, he didn't go to the prosecutor supervisor. He didn't go to the district attorney. He didn't go to the attorney general. He didn't go to the FBI. He didn't do anything. He just sat back and let everything happen. So that's one aspect of why I say that. And another aspect of it is that when the DNA didn't match me, the police went back out into the field and they interviewed 17 witnesses who knew Angela in one capacity or another, and all of them told the police that she didn't have any friends, that she didn't have any boyfriend, that she didn't have any boyfriend, that there was no consensual sex.
Because that's what they were trying to use that excuse for the others. They
for the DNA not matching me.
They tested the semen that was on her.
That's right. Yes, they tested the semen. It didn't match me, and then that's when the medical examiner says, his theory. He comes up with this the day after the DNA doesn't match me. He says that he remembered that he forgot to document medical evidence that he said showed that the victim had been sexually active. So that opens the door for the prosecutor to argue, this is how the DNA doesn't match you, and yet, you still murdered and raped her.
How could they possibly have medical? What is considered medical evidence that she was sexually active?
He claims that he saw perforations of her hymen on medical slides. That's what the medical examiner says.
But wouldn't that be from the rape?
Yeah, it would have. Yeah, it would have been. Not only that, but if there was a consensual sex and then I murdered and raped her after that, that means that there would have been seminal fluid from at least two people there,
right?
Not one,
right?
Okay, so taking it a step further, he mentions another youth by name that he claims had slept with the victim, but he didn't try to prove that. He never had a DNA test performed to prove that. He never called him as a witness. He just made the unsupported argument to the jury. But what I'm trying to get to is, in that context, when they're trying to support this consensual sex theory, the police went back into the field and interviewed 17 witnesses who knew the victim in one capacity or another, and all of them told the police she didn't have a boyfriend, there's no consensual sex. The police purposely did not document any of those witness interviews. And so that way there was nothing, they didn't have to turn that over to my attorney. So I'm all speaking to the issue of whether or not I think this is a good faith error or not. That's what I'm bringing this in for.
Additionally, wasn't there also pubic hair found on her of African American descent?
Yes, there was. There was pubic hairs found in and around the body that were determined to be Negroid and of Mongoloid origin. And I'm Caucasian. I'm white. So again, the prosecutor argues by inference. He says, "Oh, this must have come from the Vietnamese medical examiner and his African American assistant." So I've learned since then that
The pubic hair?
there was pubic and head hairs, both.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. So he's just saying the word hairs, but he's referring to both. But he's not saying pubic hairs. He's saying head. If he would have said pubic hairs, you're right. That's like really crazy. Would you get naked with the body? I mean,
We got another issue here.
Right. But he just says hairs to try to encompass everything. But the hair expert, I've learned later, the hair expert, Dr. Peter DeForest says, well, if that's your explanation, then get me the hairs from the medical examiner.
Right.
Let me do the actual comparison.
Right.
But he was never given he was never provided with any of the hairs. And one more thing on the police level, which is that not content with having forced the confession out of me with his illegal tactics, but they tried to help the prosecutor get around the DNA exclusion also. So they fabricated a statement and attributed it to me. What I mean is they claimed that I told them that I didn't know if the perpetrator ejaculated or not. And that word was not in my vocabulary as a 16-year-old. And that when you look at their police reports, that statement in their write-up of the confession, that statement doesn't appear in their early write-ups about the confession. It only appears in their write-ups after the DNA doesn't match me. So it seems clear that they came up with that in order to help the prosecutor get around the DNA exclusion. So there's a DNA test result and all the stuff that's taken place before the trial that I've just mentioned to you. So in terms of the trial itself, I couldn't afford an attorney. My family couldn't afford an attorney, so we went with Westchester County Legal Aid. So the public defender I had assigned to me was Peter Insero, and he supposedly was their best trial lawyer. So he essentially didn't defend me. He rarely met with me. When he would meet with me and I try to explain to him that I was innocent and what happened in the interrogation room, he was always shutting me up. One time he told me he didn't care if I was guilty or innocent. He never interviewed my alibi. I told him I was playing wiffle ball with Jason. He never interviewed or called as a witness my alibi. He never explains to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never uses that to challenge the confession and argue that the confession is coerced or false. Speaking of the confession, sometimes he's arguing to the jury the confession never happened. Other times he's arguing that it happened but that it was coerced. And still other times he was saying that it happened but it was false. So by adopting this throw mud against the wall type of approach, he had to have been standing there with no credibility at all in front of the jury. And when it was time to cross-examine this medical examiner, it obviously would have been important to attack his credibility because he's the one who came up with this consensual sex thing. Mm-hmm. But instead, he stood up in open court and with a big smile on his face, like if him and the medical examiner were great friends from back in the day, said to him, "You're going to be pleased to know that I don't have a single question for you." Now, the last thing is that I wanted to testify at the trial so that I could put the threat and false promise on the record. So when you defend a case where there's a false confession, you have to answer that confession. You have to explain that confession. You have to disprove that confession in as many ways as you can. You bring it all together in your closing argument. Mm-hmm. But he didn't do any of that. He wouldn't allow me to testify there either, and That was so all those things. I got a terrible defense, and there were terrible defense. Now there were a couple of other irregularities about the trial, but you want to ask me something first?
Do you think the lawyer was just incompetent, or do you think that he was working with the other side?
I kind of feel he was working with the other side because, I mean, some of these mistakes, I mean, even like a third-year law student would know not to do that. And when I've met with defense lawyers in Westchester that know my story, and I've had lunch with them, they've often asked me, well, who is your trial lawyer? And when I mention his name to them, they're quite surprised because they've tried cases with and against him, and they thought that he was pretty good.
So he's still practicing today?
No, he retired now. He retired now. So here's the other irregularities that happened at the trial. So firstly, the polygraph results, they're not admissible in court because it's not scientific. In fact, even like intelligence agents in the field, they're trained to beat the polygraph, right? So it's not scientific. And the whole premise of the polygraph, by the way, is that the theory is that if somebody lies, you'll get nervous. Your nervousness will result in an increased pulse rate, and it's the pulse rate that's actually measured by the machine.
Right. People can control that.
People can control that. Yeah. So because of that, polygraph test results are not admissible in court.
Right.
So despite that general rule, this judge comes up with this backdoor rule where he says that because the confession happened while I was attached to the polygraph, he lets the polygraphist repeatedly tell the jury that I failed the polygraph while prohibiting my attorney from questioning him about the methods that he used to arrive at his opinions. So that was one irregularity. That was definitely prejudicial against me. Second thing is that the victim's clothes, including the bra, the jury asked to see it. That correlated to one of the statements that was coerced out of me, in which I said that I ripped her bra off. The jury asked to see the bra. And that's important because some bras, you can't be, the way that they're designed, you can't rip them off of a body. So the jury asked to see the bra. And that's when the judge said that the evidence, including the victim's clothes, including the bra, had been left in the courtroom over the weekend, and that apparently the janitors thought that it was garbage, and so they threw it out, and that the bra is not available anymore. And he substituted a photo in which he said you can almost see the bra in the photo. He substituted that with the actual bra. And
that's wild.
Right. He refused to declare a mistrial. He refused to strike any testimony pertaining to the bra. And the last thing was that on the third day of the jury deliberations, they sent out a note asking, well, if we can't come up with a verdict, are we going to be sequestered over the Christmas holiday? And the judge said yes. And so I've learned since then that at that point, it was 11-1 for a conviction. There was one holdout juror who thought that I was innocent. But he said that they were all pressuring him. And he also said that when they sent out the note and we got the answer back, that the pressure ratcheted up and that nobody wanted to be there over the Christmas holiday. And so based on that, he switched his vote, even though he was not convinced that I was guilty. And so when you add all those things up, I guess it's not that surprising that I was found guilty. I mean, I never forget the day I was found guilty. I mean, it felt like I was kind of in like a nightmarish alternative reality because to my way of thinking, at least up until that point in time, I thought that only, guilty people were convicted. But they said what they did, and I was taken into custody. I remember just sitting there kind of stunned, I couldn't believe my own hearing. I mean, the first three charges that they read, I was found not guilty of, and then the fourth count they read, then they said guilty, and I mean, well, wait a minute. I mean, that can't be right. Did I miss something? Did I miss the word not? But I heard that then they read guilty and then guilty. So I was kind of like in a stunned disbelief. I was kind of beside myself.
Wow. Where were your parents during this whole trial? Or your mother rather? Was she there?
Yeah, my mother was in the courtroom, and so was my Aunt Janet. Yeah.
And when they read that, they sentenced you to 15 years. What was it, 15?
15 to life. I was sentenced to 15 to life. Well, that was when I was convicted. I went back. You come back to court after that, a different proceeding for the sentencing.
Okay.
Yeah. So I remember the day of the sentencing that. Well, I mean, my mother and aunt couldn't believe it either. I mean, they totally believed in the system. They thought that I was, going to be found not
So did
guilty.
they believe that you were the murderer at that point?
No, they did not.
They did not.
No, they did not. No, they believed that I was innocent. So when we went, so on the day of the sentencing, I begged the judge to overturn the verdict because I was innocent, and I referenced the DNA to support my contention. And Judge Colabello actually told me on the record. He said, "Maybe you are innocent," but he didn't. You would think that he would overturn the conviction then, right? But instead he took, which he could have done by reversing any number of the procedural rulings he made against me in the course of the trial, including the throwing out of the evidence issue that I went into a minute ago. But instead he took the easy way out. He gave me a 15 to life sentence. So I had been charged as an adult, tried as an adult, and I was therefore sentenced as an adult, and I was sent to a men's maximum security prison.